This video is to help solve by completing the square for IXL BB10. So notice for this example, they went ahead and gave us our quadratic in standard form. And notice this is not a perfect square, meaning we have to complete this square. Our first step in to be able to do that is to move away pieces that are not making this a perfect square. So we're going to move our given c over to the other side. So now we have our j squared minus 30j equals a negative 37. Notice I left some space for completing the square. Different from last video, we're dealing with an equation here. So recall our golden rule of equations. Whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. Just how we move that negative 37 over, whatever we use to complete this square here has to be added to the other side. So again, to complete the square, we're doing 1/2 of b and squaring it. So here 1/2 of negative 30 is negative 15, and negative 15 squared will give us 225. You can check that in a calculator. So if we add 225 to the left side, we have to add 225 to the right side, just so we can keep our balance in our equation. Now the goal of doing this and having that completing the square is so that we can factor it and write this as one thing squared on this side equals one number squared on this side. So when we factor that perfect square trinomial, we're going to end up with j plus or minus b over 2. And that sign comes from whatever our b was to begin with. So we're actually going to have j minus 1/2 of our b, which is 15, squared will equal whatever 225 minus 37 is, which happens to be 188. And our reason for doing this goes back to our solving by square rooting. We now have something squared equals a number. And the inverse of squaring is square rooting. So we're going to square root both sides to get rid of that exponent. So we're now left with j minus 15 equals plus or minus the square root of 188. Recall, guys, we talked about taking the square root. If you take the square root of 4, we have two options, 2 or negative 2. Because 2 squared will give us positive 4, and negative 2 times negative 2 will give us 4. So we always have to think when we're taking the square root, we're thinking plus or minus when we draw our own square roots. So now the only thing left to do to move j by itself would be to add 15 to both sides. So we know j is going to equal 15 plus or minus the square root of 188. Now for the sake of IXL, they want you to round to the nearest hundredth, meaning they're not so concerned about you simplifying this radical. Just so we can review that radical simplification, recall that we look for our factors. So we always did 1, 188, 2 is not a perfect square, so we know it's not gonna work. 3 does not go into this, but 4 happens to go in this, and it will go in 47 times. And 47 happens to be a prime number. So we've got our perfect square and our prime, meaning that we could write this as the square root of 4 times the square root of 47, or 2 square root of 47. So if they wanted us to write the exact answer for this, we would have 15 plus or minus 2 square root of 47. This is the exact answer. For the sake of IXL, let's plug this in the calculator and I'll show us how to do that again. So recall that we're going to want to deal with the square root first. So 188, make sure you can see that square root, And let's deal with the positive first. So I'm going to keep it positive. And this 15 is positive, so it's attached by addition. And these hold us to the nearest hundredth. So that would give us the 28.71. Let's do the second one. Now this time we're going to make it negative. So 188, take the square root first, and then make it negative. We're then going to also add 15 because that 15 is still positive. So 1.29 when we round to the nearest hundredth. So we would input both of these answers into IXL.